Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Judy and I have a passion for travel, history, and exploring how the two intersect in everyday life. I was able to spend about 36 hours in Aix-en-Provence, and while I didn't realize it at the time, I was coming down with a fairly serious illness. Initially, it wasn't really debilitating, just coughs, a runny nose, sneeze, runny eyes, but it made for a really unexpected additional experience. You can learn all about that in my short video, Sick in X. The link is in the description box below. I was on a tight schedule with a planned visit to Toulon to meet a wonderful senior citizen acquaintance who had lived there her entire life. But before that, I had a day and a half to kill and decided to kill it here in X. In hindsight, I should have stayed quite a bit longer. I didn't have particularly high expectations for this town. One of the guides I read dismissed it as merely a beautiful city filled with wealthy people, international students, and high end stores. And while all of that was true, there's an enormous Apple store on the main drag. I soon discovered that there was much more to this charming city. It has a history dating back to the days of the Roman legionaries and surprised me. It was rather like finding a delicate madeleine nestled among some crisp apples in a Cézanne, he was a local boy made good, still life. Come along with me as we explore Aix-en-Provence today. Let's discover what the city has to travel. I'm your guide, the Armchair Traveler. Before the Romans arrived, the region we now call Provence was home to Celtic and Ligurian peoples. In 123 BCE, Roman legionaries, led by Gaius Sextius Calvanus, established a settlement here near the area's thermal springs. He named it Aquae Sextiae, meaning Sextius's water. Given his military accomplishments, particularly his victories over three Gallic nations, which led to the annexation of Transalpine Gaul as a Roman province, Sextius probably deserved the honor of having a city named after him. In recognition of his victories, he was even awarded a triumph in 122 BCE. The modern name Aix comes from the Latin aquae, which means waters. While there are other towns named Aix in France, this one is specifically called Aix-en-Provence to distinguish it from others by the same name. Roman expansion into Provence was not without its challenges. In 105 BCE, two feuding Roman generals were tasked with handling some border incursions, this time not from the Celtic inhabitants, but from Germanic invaders pressing in from the north and east. Though the Germanic tribes had not yet reached Italy, Rome had already suffered a previous traumatic sack in the 4th century BCE, although that was by the Gauls. This event, steeped in legend, saw the Gauls storm Rome on July 18, 387 BC. They burnt buildings, looted treasures, massacred most of the Roman Senate right there in the Forum. That memory left a deep impression on Rome, which was wary of another invasion. They took steps to make sure it would never happen again. Unfortunately, the Roman generals sent to Provence to prevent this failed disastrously. Their rivalries led them to split their forces rather than to unite, and the result was catastrophic. One of the largest Roman armies ever assembled was divided and subsequently annihilated. An estimated 80,000 legionaries and 40,000 non-combatants perished, leaving Rome exposed to conquest. This disaster was going to change the Roman approach to their military and the frontiers forever. After that last defeat, panic gripped Rome immediately. In response, the Senate, they were no fools, appointed a man named Gaius Marius as consul and entrusted him with the task of reorganizing the military. Marius introduced significant reforms. He enhanced recruitment of soldiers. He changed the way they were trained. He redeveloped the equipment they were supposed to carry, and he also commissioned construction of a canal between Arlata, which is modern Arles, and the Mediterranean to expedite troop and material movements inside the region. You can read more about Marius in my WordPress blog. The link is in the description box below. In 102 BCE, a decisive battle unfolded near here. Under Marius's command, the Romans literally annihilated the Germanic invaders who had caused so much destruction earlier. With stability restored, Aix flourished as a Roman city, acquiring all the hallmarks of Roman civilization: a forum with temples, an aqueduct for fresh water, public baths, even an amphitheater. Hardly any of this remains visible, but the remains of the amphitheater were actually rediscovered in 2004. As Roman power waned, Aix, like many cities in the region, faced turbulent and disheartening times. The city was occupied by the Visigoths, repeatedly plundered and sacked by the Franks and Lombards, seized by the Saracens in 731 CE, and finally liberated by Charles Martel 6 years later in 737. During the Middle Ages, Aix emerged as the capital of Provence, reaching its high point in the 12th century under the rule of the houses of Barcelona, Aragon, and Anjou. Aix had become a mecca of art and learning, but like much of Provence, it suffered economic decline in the 19th century. It earned the nickname La Belle Endormie, the Sleeping Beauty, which was a nod to its sluggish urban development. It fared better than many other cities in the region and benefited from improved infrastructure such as roads, a railway line, and a train station, but its economy remained relatively modest. In the early 20th century, the city experienced a cultural revival. Just as Van Gogh's time and work in a mental asylum near Saint-Remy had reshaped the economy there, Aix found its own artistic icon in the form of Paul Cézanne. Today, visitors flock to sites associated with the famed painter, and the University of Aix-Marseille continues to attract students and scholars. In 2022, the population of the city stood at about 150,000, of whom nearly 40,000 were students at the local campus of the university. The city's flag reflects Aix's international heritage. The coat of arms of the city is steeped in historical symbolism. The gold background with red stripes signifies its past as part of the Kingdom of Aragon. The upper section is divided into three. The left part honors the counts who once called themselves the kings of Jerusalem. The center represents their rule over the kingdoms of Naples, county of Anjou, and the fleur-de-lis acknowledges the ties of the area to the Kingdom of France. The Cours Mirabeau is one of the most iconic streets in Aix. It's the vibrant artery of the city's history and culture. It was named after Honoré Gabriel Riquetti de Mirabeau, who was a representative for Aix in the Third Estate during 1789. One of the best-known establishments on the street is Les Deux Garçons, the city's oldest and perhaps most famous café, which dates back to 1792. Over the following centuries, it has welcomed numerous cultural and artistic figures. Paul Cézanne and Émile Zola were known to meet here, though whether they simply enjoyed a coffee or shared an entire carafe of something stronger remains a mystery. Cézanne's studio was only about a 20-minute walk north of the cafe. Other legendary patrons included Pablo Picasso, Jean Cocteau, Edith Piaf, and even Winston Churchill. The interior has a lovely Belle Epoque decor, the sort of thing you expect to see in a brasserie in Paris, complete with gilt mirrors, chandeliers, and a terrace. It embodied the elegance and historical grace of Aix. The image you see here captures its appearance in 2016, before a devastating fire severely damaged the interior, leading to its closure. Though restoration plans have been underway ever since, as far as I can tell, the cafe remains closed. At the far end of the street, you'll find a modern Apple store, which stands in stark contrast to the historic charm of the avenue and serves as a testament to the fact that time marches on, and perhaps the fact that this is a university town. The street is lined with wide sidewalks shaded by double rows of plane trees, which offer a welcome respite from the Provençal sun, but do pose a potential problem. Plane tree pollen becomes airborne in the spring, and while it's not universally allergenic, it does affect many people, including me. It's less notorious than grass or birch pollen, but it can still trigger hay fever and respiratory irritation. You can learn more about my unfortunate run-in with those pesky plants in a previous blog, Sick in Aix. The link is in the information block below. The street serves as a natural dividing line between two distinct districts in the city. To the north you have the Count's Town, which forms the heart of Aix's historic old city. It has narrow, winding streets and aristocratic mansions dating from the 16th to the 18th century, and is quite pretty. There are lots of places to get lost here. To the south and west is the new town called Le Quartier Mazarin. It offers a striking contrast. It was developed in the 17th century to expand the medieval city and reflects urban planning ideals of the time, featuring broad, straight streets, a symmetrical layout, and what they thought was refined elegance. The street is further enhanced by several fountains, the most notable probably being the Fontaine de la Rotonde, which is our next stop. The Fontaine de la Rotonde stands proudly at the western end of the Cour Mirabeau, serving as a monument to the arrival of water from the Zola Canal, a vital component of the town's water supply system. The canal was built in the 19th century, largely under the guidance of a renowned Italian-French engineer named Francois Zola, after whom the canal and the aqueduct were named. Francois was an Italian-born French engineer whose work in hydraulic engineering laid the foundation for modern water management throughout the region. His son, the famous writer Émile Zola, that's the same Zola who hung out with Paul Cézanne in the bar we visited earlier, was only around 7 years old when Francois passed away. His early hardships deeply influenced much of his later literary work. The fountain itself is striking, both day and night, and is designed in neoclassical style and is richly decorated. It features 3 female figures at the top representing justice, commerce, and agriculture. One notable feature of the fountain is its second or upper basin, which is right beneath the feet of the 3 ladies. Unlike the rest of the structure, the basin is made out of cast iron. The Mazarin Quarter is often compared to Le Marais in Paris because of its elegant residential charm and some historical interest. It quickly became the most coveted address here in the city after it was established and remains a favorite spot for some visitors. Personally, though, aside from visiting Église Saint-Jean-de-Malte and discovering one lovely fountain, I didn't spend very much time here. I was drawn to Église Saint-Jean-de-Malte mainly because I visited and loved Malta. The church's name is a tribute to the knights who built it. Built around 1220, the church was established by the Knights Hospitaller, a religious and military order that cared for pilgrims and defended Christian territories. It did double duty. It was a religious center and a hospital for the sick and poor. This was part of the Knights' core mission. The Knights had a significant presence here in the city in the 13th century, and the building also served as part of their commandery or base of operation. After the French Revolution, the order lost most of its power and influence, and it lost control of this building. Over time, the church has undergone significant renovations that added in bits and pieces of Gothic architecture. The facade is particularly striking and features classical details like a grand rose window, shown here from the interior, and a deep entrance. On my way back to the Cour Mirabeau and on to the northern part of the city, I stumbled across a charming fountain. Aix is sometimes called the City of Fountains, and this is just one of them. The Fontaine des Quatre Dauphins, the name means the 4 dolphins, is a celebrated fountain here in the center of the town, designed and built in 1667. You may have seen fountains with dolphins as decorations before, but this one has an additional historical note. It is said to have been the first freestanding fountain still existing from Old Aix. Jean Scholastique Piton, a 17th century French writer and historian whose middle name might hint at scholarly nature, once claimed that Aix Cathedral was built on top of a former Roman temple dedicated to Apollo. Apollo was one of the Olympian gods of Greek and Roman mythology. The location is thought to align with the area of the old Roman Forum, which has now disappeared. These transformations and rebuilds were quite common in the early Christian era, as Roman law courts and temples were frequently converted into churches because they were built solidly and looked nice. Tradition holds that the first church on the site was established around 500 AD by Saint Maximinus. The story goes here he came to Aix directly from Jerusalem with Mary Magdalene in tow and arrived in a boat that he borrowed from Saint Lazarus. The cathedral that you see today began construction in the 12th century and showcases Romanesque walls and a broad central nave. In 1171, a second nave dedicated to the saint was added to the original and the baptistry. A further expansion introduced Gothic-style transept wings. The intricately carved main portal doors are now normally covered to protect them from the weather, but they were made of red walnut and were installed in 1505. I found an old photograph from 1949 to show you some of the details. Above the portal, there's a statue of the Archangel Michael, which was sculpted by Jean Pommier in 1507. Like all medieval cathedrals, this one was built in stages over several centuries, with construction beginning in the 12th century and continuing through the 19th, making the overall process span approximately 700 years. The main structure was completed by the 16th century, but there have been various additions and renovations since. With a 4th-century build time, during a time when styles may have changed more slowly than today, but still did change, it should come as no surprise that Aix Cathedral reflects very different styles. This map gives you an idea of the layout. You might want to pause the video here to look at the map before I give you some details and photos. The western facade, through those red oak doors I showed you, is where we came in. Immediately to the left of those doors is the bell tower. Once inside, on the right, you encounter the baptistry, or at least the hole in which it once sat, complete with columns that almost certainly dated from the original Roman temple that sat on this spot. The first part of the new construction begins with the Romanesque nave, which stretches from the baptistry forward and opens on the right-hand side into the cloister. In the middle, we meet the Gothic nave, shown here in the photo on the left, and the final Baroque nave, shown on the right. One of the most eye-catching details for me was this organ. This is called the New Organ, and it dates from 1750. The most famous piece of art inside the cathedral is probably the immense burning bush triptych, which dates from 1475. It was commissioned by King René of Anjou, who we'll meet later on in our tour. It was painted by Nicolas Froment, a leading artist of the Second School of Avignon, and is absolutely massive. It weighs 1.5 tons and clearly was never meant to be moved. When it's closed, the outer panels show us two monochromatic figures resembling sculpted reliefs. On the left is a man, possibly Saint Maurice, patron of King René's chivalric Order of the Crescent. Whoever it is shown here as an angel rather than a knight with a sword. The right figure is even more mysterious. Traditionally, it's identified as St. Catherine of Alexandria, but this Catherine lacks the usual attributes, things like a wheel or a sword, leading some to suggest she might actually be Mary Magdalene, St. Anne, or possibly an androgynous St. John the Evangelist, who was the king's wife's patron saint. Open up, and the side panels show us King René on the left and his queen, Jean, on the right, in prayer. The center of the panel, however, is even more unconventional. At the bottom, we see Moses kneeling, removing his sandal and looking awestruck, just like it says in the book of Exodus. More unusually, however, the burning bush itself isn't burning. Instead, it's depicted as a lush, flowering plant with the Virgin Mary and Christ child apparently growing out of the center. I think they're meant to symbolize purity in the new covenant. But their being there displaces the angel who was supposed to be in the burning bush and explaining it all to Moses. This triptych not only left me somewhat confused, but wishing I had paid more attention in Sunday school. Cloisters are regular features in medieval cathedrals, meant as quiet places for contemplation by the priests, the monks, and even the laity. They serve much the same purpose today, along with providing some fresh air and a shady colonnaded area where hot, tired tourists can sit down and cool off in the relative shade. The cloister here was built during the earliest stages of construction of the cathedral. It is surrounded by a colonnade which would provide shade under the Provençal sun, but doubles as a kind of picture gallery and meant to be instructive. It includes figures of animals and statues of men. The four largest columns in the angles of the cloister are decorated with carvings of the symbols of the four evangelists, including this eagle representing St. John. St. Peter actually rates a full-size physical representation. He's shown here with a book and an enormous key to the gates of heaven. The preachers celebrated and remembered here were actually Dominican friars. There was a convent near here. The religious order was established by St. Dominic in the early 13th century. They were actually known for preaching, teaching, and missionary work. Today, the square remains an important landmark in Aix. The fountain you see here dates from 1758, and it represents what's called the monumental Baroque style. The obelisk in the center was carved out of a local variety of limestone called calisson, after the estate where it was quarried. The same source-supplied stone used for the construction of the cathedral, which we just visited, and many of the city's other fountains. The base is decorated with medallions, including this one, which is supposed to represent the founder of Aix, Sextius Calvinus. This lovely mansion house was commissioned by Louis, Duke of Vendôme, from which it gets its name. The building was constructed by an architect named Pierre Pavillon between 1665 and 1667. When the Duke first thought about constructing a pleasure hideaway, he took a look at the newly developed area south of the Cour Mirabeau, the Mazarin Quarter, but decided to build here on the northern side of the city. It's actually quite close to the cathedral, should the Duke have ever contemplated asking forgiveness for his mortal sins. As far as I know, he never did. Louis needed a getaway where he could take his lover, Lucrece de Forbin-Solier, who was also known as La Belle du Cannet, the most beautiful woman of her time. Today, the house is a museum and is probably actually best known for its public gardens. Place d'Albertat in Aix was built at the request of one Jean-Baptiste d'Albertat, a prominent and apparently very rich figure in French society. He owned a very nice mansion house across from the square, but he thought the view was pretty tacky. This Google Earth image shows you the layout with the fountain in the center. In 1745, he decided to transform the area and the view by purchasing and demolishing the old houses facing his property and creating a more elegant square. The new buildings were constructed in Baroque style, adhering to the strict architectural guidelines which were then in vogue in Paris. They were later sold to local residents. The fountain, however, is much newer and was only added in 1912. City Hall is probably near or possibly even built on top of parts of the original Roman structure. Perhaps one day modern archaeologists will learn more, but that's probably pretty far in the future. This building sits at the edge of a clock tower. The overall design was inspired by Italian palaces. It is the work of Pavillon, the same architect who gave the city the Pavilion Vendôme we visited a few minutes ago. Time and revolution have stripped the facade of all of its rich ornamentation. Earlier, there were statues of angels, busts of the Counts of Provence, monograms of the king. The bust of Louis XIV was replaced by a statue of Mary Anne, the Lady of the Republic. Outside in the square is a clock tower and a pretty fountain. As I was wandering around this square, watching people walk under the clock tower at its base, curiosity finally got the better of me. I went through the arch. Inside, I discovered a memorial plaque commemorating the liberation of Aix during World War II. The plaque reads, "Liberated on August 21, 1944, by the 3rd U.S. Infantry Division with the participation of French forces of the interior, beginning with the landing on the coast of Provence and accompanied by ex-resistance fighters from the city line. The city of Aix-en-Provence pays tribute to the fighters of this glorious unit." During World War II, the 3rd Infantry Division fought the Axis on all fronts. It saw action in North Africa, Sicily, Italy, France, Germany, and Austria. In France, the division landed at Saint-Tropez as part of what was called Operation Dragoon, the southern component of the French landings, which began in Normandy and began working its way north. The division met only light opposition when it landed on the beaches in Saint-Tropez. The Germans were retreating from Provence, fighting their way northward along the Rhone Valley. The plaque was placed in 2004 on the 50th anniversary of the liberation of the city. I was so focused on admiring that clock tower that I almost missed the fountain, which was hidden behind and among the fruit and vegetable sellers in a busy, bustling daily market. When I finally noticed it, I was actually quite surprised by the name. Fontaine de l'eau bénite means something like holy water fountain. I'm quite used to seeing holy water in small basins or stoups at church entrances for worshipers, but this fountain stood outdoors in the middle of a busy public square, and this had likely been a public square since the days of the legionaries. Designed in 1730 by architect Jean-Baptiste Davillet, who was a key figure in the town's architectural development, the fountain is a stunning example of the Baroque style that was popular at the time. It was commissioned to provide both holy water for the faithful and to serve as a decorative landmark. They put it outdoors for everyone to see, use, and be reminded of its purpose. King René of Jerusalem in Sicily is depicted here in his regal robes on the left, wearing a crown and holding a bunch of muscat grapes. René was apparently a wine enthusiast, and it is said that he actually introduced the variety into France. The statue showing him as a much younger and vigorous man seems rather flattering, at least compared to the detail from the triptych which we already looked at and shown here in the center, or a later portrait shown here on the right. René's claim to the title of King of Jerusalem came not from the Crusades but through family lineage. By the 15th century, the Kingdom of Jerusalem had long since ceased to exist. It fell to the Muslim forces in 1291. Despite this, European nobles continued to claim the title as a mark of prestige, often attaching it to their other realms. René was also an amateur painter, and for some time scholars mistakenly credited him with numerous paintings, largely because they bore his coat of arms. These works, typically in the early Netherlandish style, were more likely created at his direction and under his patronage. In that sense, he can be said to have fostered a school of fine arts, influencing sculpture, painting, goldsmithing, and tapestry. We already saw the result of his interest in that enormous triptych in the cathedral. René is also linked to Muscat grapes due to his contributions to viticulture. Historical records and legends suggest he played a role in improving the cultivation of these grapes, one of the oldest and most esteemed varieties in France. In his later years, René settled here in Aix, where he helped rebuild the city's economy after the devastation of the plague, and contributed to its cultural and architectural development. He is remembered as the good king, and probably for good reason. Paul Cézanne is often called the father of modern art for his profound influence on post-impressionism and his role in bridging the gap between impressionism and cubism. His innovative use of color, perspective, and composition paved the way for new artistic movements. His approach to structure and form deeply affected later artists, including Picasso. His artistic legacy continues to influence modern art. Even in death, Cézanne remains an integral part of Aix. His presence is felt not only in the art world, but in the local economy. The Cézanne walking trail allows visitors to explore the landscapes that inspired him, while his enduring legacy draws tourists and art enthusiasts, along with bundles of money, contributing not just to the city's cultural life, but also to its economic vitality. I mentioned earlier that Cézanne and writer Émile Zola would occasionally meet at a bar cafe in the afternoons. Perhaps it's time for us to consider doing the same. While we take that break, let's talk a little bit about Aix's most famous treat, calzone. These diamond-shaped confections are made from ground almonds, candied melon, and orange peel. They're topped with a layer of royal icing. They are a beloved local specialty and absolutely delicious, provided you don't have any nut allergy. Almonds, the key ingredient here, were likely introduced to France by the ancient Greeks and Romans, who spread Mediterranean crops like olives, grapes, and almonds all over their territories, wherever they would grow. The Romans in particular cultivated almonds in southern Gaul, which is modern-day France, where the climate was apparently ideal. During the Middle Ages, almond cultivation expanded even further, promoted by monastic communities and Arab influences in Provence and over in Languedoc. Almonds became a staple in medieval European cuisine and featured in both savory and sweet dishes. One historical figure often associated with almonds is none other than King René, who we just met. He was known for his contributions to agriculture, which extended beyond wine and viticulture, and possibly into almond farming as well. His efforts helped the region's almond trees thrive in this warm, dry, perfect climate. The legend tells us that they were created to celebrate the second marriage of King René to Princess Jeanne de Laval in 1454. According to the story, the young princess, she was only 22, was rather unhappy at getting hitched to a 45-year-old widower. The calzone was dreamed up to cheer her up. It appears to have worked since their marriage was a long and happy. And with that and an espresso, it's time for us to say goodbye. Come back next time for another adventure with me, the Armchair Traveler, as your guide. Thank you for traveling with me today. This year, we'll be making a grand tour of France, not just the famous cities, although we'll hit them too, but some lesser-known gems. The basis of all my French posts is my personal on-the-ground visits, extending over a period of more than half a century. I took a lot of pictures, I asked a lot of questions, and I tried to write down the answers. Things change, even in a puny human lifetime, and most French cities are considerably older than I am, so a great deal of research goes into each one of these presentations. Most of that work never makes it into the videos except as an incidental reference or a mention. You might wonder what happens to the rest of it. Well, I write it down, and sometimes, if it seems interesting enough, and I admit that is a matter of taste, I write it up and post it separately. If you want to know more, check the description box below. I'll put in links from time to time for more information. Sometimes this will be information I dug up, other times it'll be links to what I hope are honest, reputable sources. In addition, I have a travel blog, a health and wellness blog, because travel is easier if we're healthy, and can be found on Blue Sky and Facebook. The addresses are all to the side of this video. Finally, I have a favor to ask. If you enjoyed my post, please like, subscribe, and share. This will help my channel grow. Thank you and keep on traveling.